So today's lecture is going to be on migration, immigration, and urbanization in America from around 1860 to 1920. In the post-Civil War years, the United States experienced rapid urbanization. This urbanization began in major cities and attracted people from surrounding rural areas, as well as millions of immigrants from all over the world. Migrations from rural areas to the city happened for many reasons, but mainly because the United States started off as a primarily agrarian country, which was farming. Rapid improvement in farming technology made farming more efficient, which meant less work needed, less labor. People needed to go elsewhere to find jobs, mainly to the city. Farming was not the dominant employment opportunity anymore. Women were also having fewer opportunities on farms. As farms grew larger and more mechanized, it became less necessary for women. Women had once been essential to making clothes, making household goods and food, but there was not any need for them anymore. They had stores for these things. There's also an African American migration. Southern blacks also began to move from the countryside to the cities, mainly from the south to the north. They left because of things like poverty, debt, oppression, and violence that they had faced in the South. By 1900, there were substantial African American communities in over 30 cities. That's 10,000 or more people. These cities included New York City, Chicago, and Washington, D.C. Urban blacks tended to get low-paying jobs. They were still discriminated against in the North. Jobs were typically cooks, janitors, servants. Many African Americans couldn't get industrial jobs like factory workers because they were given to whites and immigrants. Alright, we're going to stop here for a minute. I have a question for you. Take a minute and think about it. Why do you think people moved from other countries to America? Think about it for a little while and move on when you're ready. Between 1870 and 1920, about 20 million Europeans immigrated to the United States. They came for many reasons, including religious persecution. They wanted to escape it. Also to improve their economic situation and make more money. Many immigrants came here to have work. Many companies recruited in other countries. They also came here for freedom, as well as to escape different conditions like famine, land shortages, and things like rising population. After coming to America, most immigrants would see that many of these things would not be what they had hoped. Immigrants were schemed out of money. They were easily replaced in their jobs. Many starved, had no choice of their living condition. I've got a couple graphs and charts here for you to look at. The first is immigration to the United States by decade, from 1880 to 1930. You can see that this is huge numbers, especially 1901 to 1910, almost 9 million people. The next is sources of immigration. So where did these people come from? You can see they marked it off by decade. It's not only immigrants from Europe. You can see at the bottom from China, from Southern America, Canada. These are huge amounts of people. This is a graph. It's showing pretty much what that chart just showed you. You can see there's a huge number of Southern and Eastern European immigrants from 1900 to 1910. there were no airplanes. How did these people get here? Where did they arrive? Most Europeans came by ship and landed on Ellis Island. Ellis Island is located, as you can see on that map there, right between New York City and Jersey City. These people who came had to pass an inspection at immigration stations. The process took a long time. People were questioned and often had to leave their belongings, and sometimes even change their names because of the language barrier. People who were sick were sent home. They had to make the long journey all the way back to wherever they came from. In order to be let in, people had to show that they were able to work, had some money to start off with. You can see in these photos here, these are real photos from immigrants who landed on Ellis Island. You can see their belongings is all that they can carry. Here's a photo of the inspection process. Looks a little intimidating, huh? Police officers asking questions. Right, what about the Asian immigrants? Where did they come? They came on Angel Island, which is located on the west coast near San Francisco. This was the immigration station for Asian immigrants. The process here was way worse than on Ellis Island. Officers harshly questioned immigrants, trying deliberately to be able to confuse them so they wouldn't be able to come into the country. Families were split up on the island because it took so long. Men and women were forced to separate. They had to live in separate barracks. They were detained from anywhere from a day to years. Alright, we're going to pause here again. I'd like you to look for something. It's going to be really fun. You're going to find a primary source document that was written by an immigrant. This can be things like journal entries or diary entries. I want you to bring it to class tomorrow, and we're going to discuss and share. We're going to see how it was really like for immigrants coming to the country. So you can find your primary source and come back to the video when you're done. Assimilation. Well, even though immigrants came from vast backgrounds, they had many things in common. Most were young, and most came to America from a rural background. Most had ethnic ties to their country and had to compete against the desire for assimilation. Many immigrants dreamed of becoming true Americans. They wanted to get rid of their old cultures to become more Americanized. Now, assimilation was not all done by choice. Public schools taught children in English, and workers wanted their employees to speak English on the job. Stores sold mainly American products that forced immigrants to change their diets, their clothing, and their lifestyles. They couldn't get the things that they had at home here in America. Church leaders also encouraged immigrants to assimilate, sometimes changing their preachings to make it more compatible to the new country. Exclusion. Because so many immigrants that came to America clung to their culture and created immigrant communities, native-born Americans feared them because they were different. Some people reacted against the immigrants out of fears and prejudices. They believed that all the corruption and problems that they were seeing in the cities were because of the immigrants. Here we've got a cartoon. USA, stay away. Okay, in 1894, the Immigration Restriction League was founded in Boston. The founders believed that immigrants should be screened through literacy tests and other standards designed to separate the desirable from the undesirable. In 1882, Congress restricted Chinese immigration because of the strong anti-Asian sentiment in California. Chinese people had only made up 1.2% of the West Coast population. That's a very small number. Here we've got a form of propaganda that was used at the time. It's a boycott of all Chinese and Japanese restaurants, tailor shops, and wash houses. People were actually forced to go against the Asians. Wasn't a great thing. Also in 1882, Congress denied entry of undesirables into the country. These undesirables included convicts, paupers, and mentally incompetent people. They even placed a 50-cent tax on anyone entering the country. Now, with all of these people moving to the cities, came huge problems. Things like housing, sanitation, water, um, crime and violence, fire. They were all problems with so many people living in so small of a space. Most urban residents couldn't afford their own homes in the city, so many rented in city centers. There was a huge demand with very little space, so landlords tried to squeeze as many residents as possible into the smallest space. Here's a little example. In Paris, there were 127 people per acre. In New York's east side, there were more than 700 people per acre. That is a lot of people in 1 acre of land. The word tenement in the late 19th century was used to describe a slum dwelling. The first tenement was built in New York City in 1850. Here we've got a picture of what a tenement looks like. Tenements had many windowless rooms, little or no plumbing, no heat, and hundreds of people often shared a bathroom. They were extremely crowded. You can see here, there's 7 people in a really small room. Here's another photo of a crowded street in New York. You can see how many people are packed into such a small space. Fire. Fire was a really serious problem in cities. It was a lot different than it is today. Fires could destroy a whole downtown area because buildings were still constructed of wood. And I know wood burns really fast. The Great Fires of 1871. They occurred in Chicago and Boston. Here on the bottom corner is a picture of Chicago. Look at all of those buildings burning. Huge fire. Here's one of Boston. San Francisco also had a catastrophic fire in 1906. Started because of an earthquake. Hundreds of people died in these fires. With 700 people per acre, if 1 acre disappeared from a fire, 700 people would be homeless. This was a big problem. There's also environmental factors with so many people living in small, crowded spaces. The disposal of human and industrial waste was a huge problem in cities. Many rivers, lakes, and drinking water supplies were contaminated, causing diseases. There was no proper place for trash either. People would throw their garbage in the street, throw it outside. They didn't have garbage men and trash pickup. Animal manure and sewage stood in pools in the streets. People still had animals like pigs, goats, horses, and they were kept outside. I don't know if you can tell, but in this picture, along the curb is a trench. That is for sewage. If you imagine what happens when it rains, that's going to fill up with rainwater and it's going to go everywhere. There's going to be sewage all over the streets. It's very unsanitary. There's also crime and violence. Much of the crime was minor in the cities, like pickpockets, con artists, swindlers, and petty thieves, but some was very dangerous. The murder rate rose really rapidly in the late 19th century, from 25 murders for every million people in 1880 to over 100 murders for every million people by 1900. It grew by 4 times in only 20 years. Various ethnic communities created gangs. Because of the crime and violence, helped police departments be formed. They started around 1900 to help protect citizens. All right, that's the end of the lecture today. Don't forget 3, 2, 1, and I'll be collecting your notes tomorrow. Be prepared to discuss your primary source and have some things to say about the lecture. See you tomorrow.